Okay, this session is focusing on Ambition 2 within the NBN Trust strategy, which is that biodiversity data is providing the evidence needed for nature's recovery. And we're going to start off this session hearing from our very own Mike Tetley, who is the Programme Manager for the Better Biodiversity Data Project, which is a phenomenally exciting project which we are leading in partnership with Nature Scot, the Scottish Government and the Scottish Biodiversity Information Forum, and you're going to hear more about it from Mike now. Thank you.
Hello, yes, my name is Mike Tetley and I am the Programme Coordinator for the NBN Scotland team, the team of people in Scotland who are working on this project to deliver better biodiversity data. And what am I going to do with my first slide? Well, what do you do at these conferences? You start with a massive picture of a puffin. There we go, massive picture of a puffin. And I think what's really important here to clarify in terms of what we're doing at the Trust and what this project is that it is part of making data work for nature. And it really chimes in and aligns with the Trust strategy from 2022 to 2027, and we have some very ambitious targets. We like to be very ambitious, thinking about what we're trying to do, and that strategy has these four key ambitions. And realistically, better biodiversity data, mobilizing and being able to work with the community of data pathway, data holders in Scotland, making that mobile and making it accessible is a key part of this strategy and this ambition for the NBN Trust going forward. But where did the Better Biodiversity Data Project come from? In 2018, there was a review done by many people in Scotland from the Scottish Biodiversity Information Forum to assess biological recording infrastructure in Scotland. And can I just, as a quick survey for myself, how many people were involved in SBIF? Put your hands up. A lot of people in the room. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this work. It led to this project and my job. Thank you very much. But what is the point of SBIF? What did SBIF say? What was this new infrastructure? And it wasn't just, we need to do a bit. We need to be transformative in terms of what we're doing for the work we need to do to create and build this infrastructure that's needed for biodiversity information, to get biological records exactly where it's needed to make the most impact, to be most effective. So what have we got here? We've got transformed data flows, thinking about clear links between data and the NBN Atlas. We need to think about transformed service provision. So we have to think about the full coverage across Scotland, designed for added value, accessibility and inclusivity. We need to think about transformed funding, with long-term funding secured for a coordinating body, keystone organisations and the wider recording community. This is about that entire chain of where data is collected all the way through to how data is used. We need to think about a transformed structure and culture around how we're doing things. It's not just about data going into one computer and coming out of another. There are people involved in that process as well, in that infrastructure. So it's very important that we think, with a coordinating body, working in partnership with regional hubs and local service providers of that information, getting it to where it needs to go. And finally, transition by 2030. It was clear in the SBIF review that this is not something which, needs to happen in a long time. We need to have this working now, and we need to have this working within the timescales of all of this legislation and global mandate we have to move forward to make this connected. And just as a little kind of interlude to this, Mary this morning, great presentation. Thank you very much, Mary. I think what we have here is Scottish Government is taking it very seriously. And as we were saying, she said that, we had COP15, this Convention on Biological Diversity meeting we had last year, and they were setting these targets, these mandates for this new coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which kind of is the continuation of the Aichi targets from previously. And we have this new target 21, which is basically what we do as a community. And they've said, you need to keep on doing that. You need to keep on working together as a community of data collectors and aggregators to make sure this is going and being effective. So I think that that is very important. Scottish Government has recognised that as well. They released their Scottish Biodiversity Strategy in draft. Before this, they've now released a new version of that, which has gone to consultation. And Mary this morning, so I'm just reinterpreting what she said, but in graphical format. So basically, this is what's happening. So we had that 25-year strategy leading to that 2045 when they want to deliver effectively their international targets for the Convention on Biological Diversity, that UN agreement, and these 5-year delivery plans. So being able to monitor how well are we actually doing every 5 years with actually moving forward. How are we investing our resources in best actually meeting these commitments? And all of this also is contained within the legislation that is coming. The Environmental Bill, which we'll have on consultation next year, which will go into the Environmental Act. So all of this work going forward will be legislated in terms of how we are monitoring and how we are delivering things. And what I'm very happy about is, and I will get the laser to work, down here, Better Biodiversity Data Project. Yay! Thank you, Scottish Government. That's great. So actually within the deliverable targets and the indicators of what's actually happening, we actually have this specifically mentioned within the current consultation. Fantastic. Data is actually in there. Data legislated. Amazing. Oh, that's so good. It is a real step forward. So how are we actually doing that? How are we actually meeting this demand and this, going forwards, picking up the torch from SBIF going forwards? So, Better Biodiversity Data Project. So, Better Biodiversity Data is a limited time project, and it's going from 2023 to 2025 for our delivery of our objectives, and it is basically supporting the biodiversity strategy to be able to secure the access to the data needed to set these targets and measure this progress against the background of the legislation we have, those 5-year delivery plans, how it fits into the global targets we need to follow as a global community. It's led by the NBN Trust. So we as the NBN Trust and the NBN Scotland team are working in partnership with Scottish Government, Nature Scot, and the Scottish Biodiversity Information Forum Advisory Group. So SBIF hasn't gone away, SBIF still exists, and they are thinking beyond the kind of time-limited aspect of this funded project to think about those things which need to continually be thought of for delivering after we finish this project. Okay? And BBD will develop a fit-for-purpose infrastructure. So effectively working with a group of partners to facilitate biodiversity data services across Scotland. So I love looking at things and how they look on a screen and trying to, describe something in an infographic. And this is basically the thought. This is the idea, is that, we have loads of people out there collecting data, and we have loads of people who need data. And basically what we need is really good biodiversity data. We need the best available information that can actually be that use. But you're not going to get that unless you have sustained investment in that infrastructure. And we're really seeing the work that we're doing right now, Better Biodiversity Data, the new team that we've got in NBN Scotland. We're really trying to drive that process. We're really trying to drive this concept of, if you want best available information from everyone together in an infrastructure, you need to sustain your investment in that system. So what are our objectives in BBD? Well, we have 3 objectives. Objective 1, which we want to deliver a nationwide partnership providing biodiversity data services on behalf of Scotland. We want to create a fit-for-purpose data management and digital services system, providing financially sustainable, value-added services to the users of that system. And Objective 3, we want to try and foster a connected, functional biodiversity data community and the infrastructure, okay, the people, but also the agreements and the technology behind that, which follow fair and open data principles across all the sectors who are going to be working as part of that infrastructure. Who's taking on this responsibility and role? Well, we now have everyone in post. Yay, we've actually got a team doing this. So we have myself as the program manager. We have Christine, the partnerships officer, who's working with all of the different partners in our project. We have Emily, who is our data and digital services manager, thinking about services and how data is able to meet those. What are we going to have to report on? And we have our business analyst team who've come in to work with our partners to say, what are your requirements? What requirements do we need in this infrastructure, specifically a system that is going to work for you to continue providing the services that you do for Scotland, okay? But as a part of this process, we've been, visiting many people. There are many challenges. We have poor data flows between terrestrial, freshwater, marine. That was touched on before when we were talking about sea search and, from GBIF. We're not getting information from commercial sources. That's what we need. Data is collected as part of business, but it's not necessarily going into the atlas. And from academia and research. Student projects that go out there, collect data, that often doesn't make it into the infrastructure either. So that's something we want to concentrate on. There are inconsistencies in coverage to do with resources and funding at a national level in terms of capacity of staff to respond to data requests and the ability to fill geographic or taxonomic data gaps. We also know that we have problems and bottlenecks in verification pathways and timescales. So, local expertise, national verifiers. We have recording apps now with AI, but sometimes AI can make mistakes. There are only statues of hippos in Glenrothes, okay? There are not hippos in Glenrothes. Right, there we go. So it's very important to take that into account. Challenges, training, engagement. We need to think about the community, we need to think the people element. And there's like a massive proliferation of routes for where data can come from, like where historic data fits into things. The capacity to process all these records. We saw what that was like from Helen's presentation this morning with the quantity. We've got incomplete picture and uncertainty about everything. And if you look at this doesn't make any sense, does it? No, it doesn't make any sense because I made it with an AI. I put the SBIF review into an AI image generator and it gave me this. It's meaningless. So both human and artificial intelligence are equally confused about biodiversity data flows in Scotland. Okay, so that's something we've got to work with and actually be able to go on from. So we have, in many cases, we have our objectives, but right now we're thinking of the solutions we need and the outcomes. So that's very much how we're looking at it, our objectives and our solutions, what we need to create, and what they will look like effectively and work together. So we're going on from that perspective. I realize people have probably taken pictures of these, so I'll do them fairly quickly. There we go. Objective 2, assessing what's actually out there, thinking about a multi-tenanted database that serves our needs, and thinking about, there we go, Objective 3, mapping those data flows, being more familiar, doing something that's better, potentially, than what AI just gave me just before. So, and on that note, I would like to thank all of the project partners from the BBD project. We had a large meeting of everyone yesterday. We had 28 people in a room and I think an equal number of people online. Meeting yesterday in the museum in the tower, and we went through all of these issues, working together as a project group, which we're really hoping to be able to communicate back to you very shortly. So I'd like to thank all of those people, many of them in the room today, so thank you so much. And I just want to end there with thank you, and just, thank you very much for Scottish Government and Nature Scot for being partners in this project and delivery of it. And if I can say one more thing if that's okay. I have been learning, Gaelic words. I've been fascinated. I live on the Isle of Mull, okay? And what I thought was fascinating was learning about the translation process for going from better biodiversity data to the Gaelic, which is data bia murdoch na shar. I think I've got that down quite well now. I think that's quite good. But what's amazing in the actual translation of that word is that it's not just a direct translation, okay? The actual narrative form in Gaelic of how you express something is that this doesn't just say better biodiversity data, it's saying data on biodiversity that is made better through the process of doing something. And that's exactly what we're doing. So I think it chimes with the idea of like that Gaelic translation of how we're moving forward. So I thought that was particularly nice. And I'd like to thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. We have a little bit of time to make up, unfortunately, so I won't have questions until the end. But Mike and the entire BBD project team are here all day, so do please go and say hello and find out more about the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, next up we have Dr. Ben Rowson from the Conchological Society of Great Britain and Ireland. Handing over to you.
Okay.
Ben, thank you very much.
Right, hi. Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm the honorary non-marine recorder for the Conchological Society of Great Britain and Ireland. That makes up quite a lot of the title. So if you've read my whole title, you've got a head start on what's in the talk. I'm a curator in a multidisciplinary national museum, not unlike this one, which is Amgueddfa Cymru, the National Museum of Wales. So I've got two perspectives, I suppose, and I guess my role in this session is to sort of represent the taxon-specific recording scheme end of the spectrum. So I've got some quite specific examples, and I hope you find them interesting. Right, okay. So citizen science is very popular with public bodies of all kinds, and the kind of places there you can get discretionary funding from as well. Your director mentioned DISCO, and he mentioned voucher specimens, so here at the National Museum of Scotland, they've obviously got a good handle on all these things. But I find if that isn't the case, then citizen science is a great way to get people engaged, because everybody thinks it's about people recording things for the very first time. So ordinary people joining in. I was at a conference last year at the top right there. This is the World Congress of Malacology. And we had a nice discussion about that. It was in Munich in Germany. And would you believe the Germans have a special word for the people who are amateur contributors and are kind of at the top end of citizen science. So people who have developed their expertise over many years, and they're not beginners at all, they're experienced, and they're producing really skilled outputs and data and work in publications like the Journal of Conchology, which the Society publishes. So we like to think this is all one project, one citizen science project that's been going since the 19th century and is still going on today, where we span the whole range of activities from beginners to the so-called Vachamateuren. We started in the late 19th century, almost 150 years old. The Society was begun in Leeds. We've always covered the whole of Great Britain and Ireland. The Society was begun by John Taylor, who was a publisher. But the first records in the recording scheme, which started soon after, were made by a lady, Miss Fanny Heel. And since the early days, we've run two recording schemes. So there is the non-marine scheme, which I'm representing. There's also a marine one, which I know little about and is almost completely independent. But they have in common that they both provide the majority of the data that's available on mollusks, both on the NBN Atlas, which we couldn't do without in the UK, and the National Biodiversity Data Centre in Waterford for the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland as well. All this data is as open access as we can possibly make it. It's all very strict. We pride ourselves on our strict standards of verification. So ours is, in some ways, the smallest data set on mollusks because it's most strictly verified by the honorary recorders. And it seems to be accessed, and we thank the NBN for the opportunity to see that our data is being used. I'm just going to talk about the non-marine scheme, which has got about almost 350,000 records in there now. The set of species isn't very big, there's about 250, but they do a diverse range of things. And the scheme's very active. We've got many, many contributors, and we take in about 10,000 new records a year. And despite that, the attitude persists in long-established societies that we're not doing enough recording, but we're actually making more records than ever before. And like other societies, we started with Vice County recording back in the early days, moved to square recording with Michael Kearney, who was a very influential recorder who died sadly last year, produced the Atlas, and then we put our first records online, and are now in the smartphone era. And the data is just streaming in, and we want to send it to the NBN as quickly and as accurately as we can. We can already see changes since the landmark Atlas that was printed in 1999. On the left, you've got an example of a native species that has just declined enormously. I don't think it was ever in Scotland, but it's gone extinct in England. and Northern Ireland, and it's just hanging on in a couple of other places on the left. And on the right, an example of a species which is spreading rather rapidly, and that's caused us to rethink its status. We thought it was probably a native one, but perhaps it's introduced because it's showing that kind of distribution pattern. So in terms of data serving nature, well, we're keeping a close eye on species that seem to be disappearing and that other people just don't seem to care quite so much about. This is a nice example, or a sad example. It's the Thames ramshorn, which was only ever found in the Thames in southern England. The little cross shapes on the map are subfossil records, so we can be certain it's a native species, and it once lived all the way down the Thames, but is disappearing and retreating into the headwaters. And nobody has seen a live one since 2010. It may already be extinct, we don't know, but in our last red list, which was 10 years ago, it was classed as vulnerable. We urgently need to update the status of species like this. Overall, this was a paper which I keep referring back to. I hope I've understood it properly. It was produced by the boffins at BRC. But they use a Bayesian method to use map data like we provide to estimate changes in occupancy. And they found that non-marine mollusks, the terrestrial ones, are doing okay, whereas the freshwater ones are doing not so well. There's a relative decline, and we've had a lot of discussions about that at Conchological Society meetings, but I think it's probably reflecting a real situation in that there are species like that, Thames ramshorn and the freshwater pearl mussel and things, that really have become rarer and more restricted. We're pleased to say that data has fed into the State of Nature report for the UK, and perhaps its individual components as well. So here's a couple of clams, part of the current calamity that's happening all over Britain. The two on the left are in the top 10 of all species that this review we took part in identified as potential problems for Scotland. So it's things that are likely to arrive and to cause problems. The Asian clam is a right pain, and so can the quagga mussel and the zebra mussel be. You actually had zebra mussels in southern Scotland, and they were eradicated, but they could come back. And then on the bottom right is something much more obscure, which I don't know if anyone's heard of, a Gulf wedge clam. Oh, yeah, good. Is that Craig McAdam? Oh, good. Excellent. He knows all about it then. So if you see this, it looks like a marine bivalve, and it's found in brackish areas, but it's spreading throughout Europe, and I'm sure it'll probably already be in some of Scotland's port areas. But obscure things like that tend to be what our society does particularly well. Here's another monster, the Chinese mystery snail. They're really big, bigger than golf balls. They're tolerant of cold water, cold weather. They're spreading all over Europe and in North America. They're Chinese originally. They first turned up in 2018. An amateur found them in the nature reserve. They've probably been released from an aquarium. Through the magic of record verification, in this case through iNaturalist, we became aware of another population in Southampton, and they're also in some fishing lakes just outside Southampton now. So I think we're probably witnessing the spread, or the establishment and the spread of this species in real time. And this is great because people have really mobilized for it. We've done a GB risk assessment, or our colleague Martin Willing has, and they've already started trying to eradicate them in the nature reserve. And this has led on to some eDNA work with the English Environment Agency. This one, it's a terrestrial snail, Helix leucorum, also heading your way, I expect. If you've ever bought snails to eat, you may well have got these, or you would have got their empty shells in the stack that they put on top of the tin. It's the Turkish escargot, a little bit cheaper than the escargot de Bourgogne, the French one. It's been in Britain for a long time, our records suggest, but there's been a sudden explosion in the last 10, 20 years, and it's been found in more and more places. New Vice County records, turns up on the apps as something people are likely to notice because it's a big, huge snail. This is a real nightmare, the ghost slug, also, I'm sure, coming your way. This feeds on earthworms. Our first record was from Southeast Wales in 2004. But again, after building up in a core area, it suddenly seems to have gone a bit crackers, and it's turning up in isolated places all over. So please look out for them. And I'm certain we're seeing the real-time spread of this. It's so distinctive that it would have been mapped if it was here before then. So records building up all the time, an increasing proportion of them are coming via the apps. So the orange and the blue there represent iRecord and iNaturalist. iRecord have been really supportive. They've given us loads of help with verification. And volunteers like Christopher, who's also based in Scotland now, have helped me a lot with the slugs. iNaturalist we can just about keep up with. We've used those in the Society and with the Natural History Museum and the Royal Horticultural Society. We use them for different initiatives where we try to get beginners involved and to get interest in records. But as somebody mentioned earlier, there is such a thing as catastrophic success. And I think I'm suffering from this in terms of iNaturalist in particular, because we've broken down the records and the vast majority of them concern things that are easy to go out and find in the backyard, big enough to photograph, which tends to mean they're pretty common and not all that exciting as well. So that increasingly is placing a burden on our data verification systems, such as poor old Christopher, who has to answer everybody's questions on the slugs, and I do all the snails. I think we're going to have to limit the number of those that we accept in future without some kind of assistance or way of screening them out. So I hope that's a reasonable summary of 150 years of the recording scheme and how it's changed quite excitingly and quite rapidly just in the last decade or so. I thank all the people who contributed the records and the people who will do in future too. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ben. It really struck me what you said about that people don't seem to care. And now, in this room, we do, collective group hug, we do care, and we need to spread that further. So thank you so much. Again, we'll save questions for the end. Thank you. Right, our next speaker is Dr. Steph Bradbeer, who is from Yorkshire Water, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her tell us about the INS mapper. Thank you, Steph.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Steph Bradbeer from Yorkshire Water, which might not be where you think someone would be coming from today. So I'm the invasive species and biosecurity ecologist at Yorkshire Water, and I'm here to talk to you today about Innsmapper, or if you'd rather I said Borodal, it would be Mapia Inns in Welsh. So this is a new, shiny app and website for reporting the sightings, surveys and management of invasive non-native species. And I'm going to run you through kind of the functionalities of what Innsmapper is, by proxy what maybe Innsmapper is not. But just to flag, this launched 3 months ago, so comparative to some of the studies that we've been hearing about today, still relatively new, but building on really good work that's come in the past from the previous Innsmapper platform, things like Plant Tracker, things along those lines. Right. Ooh. Japanese knotweed has just flown in from the side. So I'll start with the steering group and the funders of Innsmapper. So as you can see around this kind of central screen is a number of players. You'll note that there's a number of water companies, especially the Aquatic Biosecurity Partnership is water companies in itself. But you can see NBN has been engaged from the start, and also the National Secretariat on Invasive Species. So we've very much got, hopefully, the right people in the room to inform how this tool can be best used by the end users, which I'll talk about in a minute. So as an overview, Innsmapper is an app and a website. Like I've already said, it's for different types of records. So you can report sightings of invasives, you can report surveys, and you can also report management, which is one of the kind of new things that are needing to be captured within the management of invasive species, and therefore being able to share management data along with what is where is really important. Geographically, it is England, Scotland, and Wales. Which is building on kind of other previous predecessors which were more geographically limited. It's free to use. Everyone get your phones out at lunch and download it, please. And so the main purpose of Innsmapper is to be that effective resource to support INS programs, so invasive species programs that are either led by local action groups, wildlife trusts, rivers trusts, all the way through to kind of water companies and landowners. To really coordinate that management of invasive species, especially for aquatic invasives at that catchment level, working down the catchment to effectively make it more effective and then therefore more kind of fund viable as well. I've already mentioned available in Welsh and English, and the data is open access, which is the buzzword of the day. So I'm pleased to say it is open access, publicly available, CC by BY licensed. it's 3 months old, to kind of really hone in on who is INSMAPper for. So the purpose is to help with the coordinated management of invasive species, so that can be things like local action groups and wildlife trusts, but also fundamentally it is pitched at a level that someone who just spots Himalayan balsam or Japanese knotweed and needs to report it as a one-off report can use this tool to also report. So it's aimed to be at the kind of more simplified level so that the general public can also use it, as well as more of those additional functions for people like wildlife trusts. The functions, I've kind of already said the top 3 here. There is a verification function on INSMAPper, which I go on to explain. There's also ID guides, so kind of educating the users of the platform with photos for each species, why are they a problem, for example, things like that. And then you can also view and download data submitted to INSMAPper, both in terms of your own data, but also everyone else's data, obviously on the website platform. To flag what species can be reported via INSMAPper, there are 62 species able to be reported. These are freshwater and terrestrial species focused. There's no marine species. And the focus of INSMAPper is very much looking at those relating sightings of invasives to those management efforts. So things like horizon species, things that we predict to arrive in the country but are not here yet, those aren't able to be reported on INSMAPper. The focus is for species that are already here under management, or already here, management isn't actually achievable yet, but it might be in the future. The species list itself was kind of devised with a lot of stakeholder engagement, so things like the local action group meeting held by the Secretariat every year. We asked effectively the end users of this tool what species would be of use for them to be able to use this tool with. But obviously, as we move across time, if there is a new species that's ideally needing to be added to this tool, we obviously have those capacities as well. So quickly to just run you through what it would look like. Reporting an invasive, it includes photos. You're able to pick the species that you're wanting to report. Those little emoticons there show you that you'll be able to have a look at some photos for reference or some information. Also, if you have a favourite invasive, which is a funny term, but I mostly mean probably Himalayan balsam. If you very frequently are seeing a certain invasive, rather than having to scroll all the way down to find that particular species name every time, things like that, just to simplify the user experience of using the platform, you can favourite an invasive. So what's your favourite invasive? The ways that the data can be captured, it isn't just point data. So it is point, area, or line data that you can capture using the tool. So that's very helpful, for example, if you do have a field of Himalayan balsam or zebra mussel, as we just talked about, within a whole reservoir, it more represents the spread of that invasive. And especially when you then look at this across time and are able to coordinate management, it might be that across time, hopefully, it still may be present, but you may be able to see records getting smaller and smaller as management is implemented, and all of that data can be captured on INSMAPper. Then very kind of standard bits of information that has to be inputted, but things as fundamental as the date. You cannot submit a record without the date. You can either categorise it as area or number of individuals. So you obviously can't have an area of American mink, so it works across the different taxa groups that you can report, and that's as simple as creating a report, and it would be submitted. To jump over to an INS survey, so this is a different type of record that could be reported on INSMAPper. There's 2 different types, and I'll kind of touch on why there are 2 different types. When you're doing an INS survey, by that I mean you're walking along a stretch of river or wherever it might be, terrestrial, and are looking for invasive species and want to report them. This allows us to capture data on that kind of survey effort, so something that we've already touched on, where is being surveyed and where isn't being surveyed for invasives. So again, if that data is captured, say a local wildlife trust who have volunteer groups that want to go out and survey for invasives, where is it most helpful to then send those volunteers? That data can be inferred from the data on INSMAPper. A general survey is that you are going out and looking for any invasives, doing a nice walk. A targeted survey means that you are specifically looking for up to 5 invasive species. So you're walking along and you are specifically looking for Japanese knotweed and giant hogweed. That allows the capture of this data to infer that the user is competent in IDing those species and also is specifically looking for those species. You know, you can't look everywhere when you're doing a survey. If someone then, on completion of that survey, for example, hasn't found giant hogweed, they can submit a non-detection report through that survey method. I very much hazarded against an absence report, because can you say an invasive species is absent? Not really. So that's where the term non-detection comes in. But there's two different types of surveys as a quick overview. For a targeted survey, you would select the species that you're looking for. You can pick up to 5, which again was fed back from the stakeholders of what would be useful for them. And then it's similar to Strava, really. It will track where you walk. It doesn't track your pace or anything like that. Well, it does say your total distance. But you can start the walk, it will track where you go, and then as you walk, if you see any invasives, you can report them, and it will appear on the map. Once you've completed your survey report, here you can see this is where I've walked, I spotted some invasives here, and it's submitted as a complete record. Those individual sightings will appear on the sightings layer, but also then you have your survey layer. And then finally, we have invasive species management. So again, just to kind of drum on, that it's so important to know who's doing what where in terms of coordinating and managing invasive species and their populations and their impact on the environment. So this is aiming to be that tool to be able to share who's doing what where, when, and what methods are being used. The types of management that someone can submit, which is on the right here, kind of for a terrestrial plant, there's different types of things you may do to combat the presence of it. But the types of methods that are that kind of appear on INSMAPper as options are taxa specific. But as such, there is a little bit of a kind of warning. Warning's not the right word. I can't think of what the word. Disclaimer of the fact that you need to check that the management method you're using to manage an invasive species is appropriate for that invasive species. For example, you're not going to be doing, matting of giant hogweed. It needs to be appropriate. But whatever the species is, you can select the management that you are using. Is it part of a one-off treatment, or is it an ongoing program? And then optional things such as management effort. So that was very important to capture, especially volunteer effort used by local action groups. Which organisation is undertaking that management, photos of it, and who was the treatment done by. It might be 2 different people. So these are types of information that we, again, have been told by stakeholders that are going out and managing invasive species. This is what we want to know, effectively, is who's doing what, where, and when. That's great. That's the kind of core functions of INSMAPper in terms of submitting of records. Also on INSMAPper, you can yourself view your pending records, view records submitted to INSMAPper in its entirety, verify photos, and view the ID guides and information, and there's a little bit more. There's a few slides here just quickly running that through. So this is the app. You're able to see pending records. So on the on the left here, that record, it didn't submit at the time of submission, probably because of signal, and that's fine. It will stay on the phone, and then you can submit it when you get home. You can also see all of your own submitted records. You can look at the records submitted to INSMAPper, both on your phone, so that allows you, if you're in the field and you spot something and you want to know, does anyone else know that this is here, and when was it last recorded, you can look at that in the field and know if you should make a new record. Fundamentally, we always encourage people to make a record of anything that they do spot. Then that's on the app function. Sorry, just to go back there. There's also a number of filters available both on the app and the website. More of them are on the website. So things like geographic or catchment boundaries, local lurk boundaries, things like that, so that when you're then using the download function, you can kind of splice the data for what's relevant for what you're wanting the data for. Verification is crowd verification, so any user of INSMAPper can go on and see photos of invasives or suspected invasives and submit if they agree that it is the correct species, no, skip, or flag. I won't go too much into this, and there's more information on this on the website, but again, I'm happy to explain it just because of time. Finally, the more slide, we've got the ID guides here, licensing and funding, and because it's invasive species, as well as the health and safety, we're always going to be mentioning biosecurity. I've already mentioned the data. We have an FAQ page. And then finally, we also do have some videos on how to do each of those functions that I've quickly whizzed you through here. So that is everything on INSMapper. And I'd just really like to obviously thank all of the contributors in terms of the development of it, but also the stakeholders and ultimately the users that are going out and recording this data for us. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph, for that gallop through the INSS Mapper. Congratulations on the launch. Great to see the tool, great to see the immediacy of recording and seeing the data coming through. So very well done. Our final speaker from this morning's session is Adam Fraser from the Cairngorms National Park Authority, who's going to speak about monitoring biodiversity in the Cairngorms National Park. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for the invitation to come and speak here today. I'm Adam Fraser. I'm the monitoring ecologist for the Cairngorms National Park Authority. My role is very much about rationalising data to inform biodiversity and management for biodiversity within the national park. So today I'm going to introduce to most of you and update the rest of you on progress with one of our flagship projects, really, which is the Cairngorms Nature Index. So firstly, we don't have puffins in the Cairngorms, so we've got a giant picture of a ptarmigan. Why do we need a nature index? I don't think I need to explain really the policy background. It's been touched on by the Cabinet Minister and Mike as well today. There is an imperative really now to not only implement and deliver ecosystem restoration, but also to monitor the change. And in the Cairngorms Nature Index, we're going to use that as a tool to baseline the health of our ecosystems within the park and monitor the effectiveness of conservation actions that are being undertaken over time. So broadly speaking, the Cairngorms National Park Authority has a list of ambitions and objectives to tackle the twin crises. And these are outlined in the National Park Partnership Plan. And these include area-based targets for ecosystem restoration. We also are required to develop a nature network. And we also have species recovery projects under our Nature Action Plan. But the Cairngorms Nature Index will provide us with the means to know if we're moving things in the right direction. Are we actually delivering for biodiversity? So how does the Nature Index actually work? We're going to develop indices, or we are developing indices, for 6 major ecosystems within the national park, listed here. The last 2 here, numbers 5 and 6, very much represent cultural landscapes, whereas the first 4 are, perhaps can be envisaged as more natural landscapes. Looking under the hood, the Nature Index fundamentally is a weighted average of scaled indicators. So for each ecosystem, we select a suite of indicators. These are typically species or species assemblages, and they have to reflect the biological diversity of that ecosystem. So across taxonomic groups, functional groups, trophic levels, we want to incorporate keystone species and also have a suite of species that are particularly sensitive to different environmental pressures, so we can interrogate the effect of those pressures at a later stage. Each indicator is given a value between 0 and 1, and that's scaled against a reference value. 0 is that indicator is absent from the ecosystem, and 1 is that it's in there and it's in a pristine state, or near natural state. Those values are based on data. And the bulk of that data comes from monitoring schemes. Where we lack data, we can use statistical modelling techniques or expert assessment to fill in some of the gaps. So as I mentioned, each indicator is scaled against a reference level, and that reference condition is required so we can monitor change over time. The methodology of setting that reference condition has to be consistent over time so we can actually assess the scale of change. Indicator values for each indicator are aggregated for the ecosystem, and that gives an overall index value for each of our 6 ecosystems. And at this stage, we're using a sort of benchmark of 0.7, which is considered to be good ecological condition. So it's not maximal, but it's optimal, I suppose. A few health warnings about interpreting index values. You will all be aware of these, and this is just really to highlight that we're aware as well. Overall ecosystem trends can mask the responses of individual indicators, so we will need to dig deeper into individual indicators to see what's happening. A high index value doesn't necessarily mean that the threats to the ecosystem are low. There might be lags in the system. And equally, conservation action might be staving off a pressure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that conservation action is invaluable. Low index values might not reflect the positive influence of conservation management, conversely. So basically, when interpreting the index, individual values are therefore not reflective of the health and functionality of the ecosystem. It's the trend, it's the direction of travel. We want to see things moving towards one, not necessarily just take the individual index value and assume that that's the state of the ecosystem. The Cairngorm Nature Index is broadly consistent with the approach developed by the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research, NINA, and they're a partner on the project and have been offering advice and support on technical issues. The Norwegian Nature Index has been running for over a decade now, and it's actually been adopted in other countries as well. And just to give you a brief glimpse of what that looks like, this is the website. You can go and interrogate an ecosystem. Here I've picked out the Montaigne one. And it's spatially explicit, so it's divided into regional or regions within Norway. And changes in values can be explored over, visually displayed spatially over time, as well as the graph plotting the changes in index values. Equally, you can interrogate individual indicators, so I've selected golden plover just at random here. And pressures can be attributed to each indicator, so we can accumulate pressures and identify how much impact particular pressures are having on suites of indicator species. So we might want to understand why golden plover values are lower in the south of Norway as opposed to the north, and we can actually interrogate the pressures to see what's happening. I don't know the answer to that, by the way. That's just an example. So where are we with developing the Nature Index in the Cairngorms? We've developed a pilot for the freshwater ecosystem. That's our first one. And we are currently producing indices for the remaining 5 ecosystems with the ambition to publish all of this by the end of next year, about this time next year. We're currently selecting indicators and setting reference levels, and we're undertaking this in collaboration with an advisory group, many of which the representatives are here today from a variety of organisations, government agencies, representative bodies, NGOs, and landowner groups. So here's a glimpse of the freshwater ecosystem outputs. We divided the park neatly into 100 tessellated hexagons, and then further into 10 reporting units at sub-catchment level. Index values for the freshwater ecosystem we've actually projected back in time and compiled on a 5-year cycle between 2000 and 2020. So overall, these are, apologies for the poor resolution of the map here, but broadly speaking, we can see that index values are roughly stable over time. If you go from the top left across to the top right and then down to the bottom right, that's the trend through time. I've listed here the indicators that we have included in the pilot. There's also additional indicators that we want to include before final publication of the index next year. But we're overcoming certain issues with the data, the type of data, the way in which it's presented. Interrogating some of the individual indicators, we can look at river flies here as an example. We can see that indicator values are in good condition overall, and there's a slight increase in condition. Whether that's statistically significant or not, it doesn't really matter. But spatially, we can see that there's an increase in the spay catchment to the west of the park, and that might be driving that slight increase in values overall. Another example is waterfalls. You can see here on the map that we don't have indicator values for a large proportion of the park. That's not to say that waterfalls aren't present. That's just that the data that exists for waterfalls is not compatible with the means of analysis that we use in the Nature Index. There are a vast number of records of waterfall across the park, but they tend to be just occurrence records. and we don't know how much effort was put into getting those occurrence records was, and where the absences are. However, we can derive a trend from the remainder of the park. This is from data collected by the University of Aberdeen, which shows that waterfall are currently in good condition, and that jump between the first reporting period and the second one might be a reflection of the Cairngorm's mink eradication project that was undertaken in that time period. So what does the Nature Index need to function? And principally, it needs data. And that's also the principal limitation for the Nature Index. We need high-quality data. There is a vast amount of data out there. It's collected across many, many projects, from individuals through to NGOs and government agencies to landscape-scale collaborations like Cairngorms Connect. We can use data that isn't specifically designed for the Nature Index. We have the tools to do that. And also we have means to derive metrics from biological data that isn't just simply abundance or diversity metrics. However, the quality of data and the flows of data are something of an obstacle, and one that we want to continue to work on to break down, and hopefully working alongside the Better Biodiversity Data Project will help us to do that, to feed the Nature Index with the data it needs. I just want to also give a brief nod. It's been touched on in many talks today about the advent of new technologies and how they can offer us enormous amounts of data. And the opportunities here really are vast, particularly for the Nature Index, because this can create baselining and also repeatable surveys which provide suitable data in continuous form. That also provides some challenges, which again have been touched on by others today, in that we will end up with large data sets, and collating, storing and analysing those alongside the traditional sort of species occurrence records is something of a challenge. So I just want to sum up, really, the Cairngorm Nature Index, the sort of use and opportunities. We see it really as a hook on which to hang the coat of biological recording within the Cairngorm National Park. It's a shared vision. We have worked with project partners to develop the Nature Index to date, and will continue to do so. But we also want to do more work with local recording groups and deploy citizen science and estate staff and rangers and so on to the best benefit of the Nature Index. So we want to use this as a focal point to improve and encourage biological recording within the national park. And hopefully that will feed in to a mechanism where we can not only reflect what is going on with our biodiversity in the national park. We don't just want this to be the state of nature of the Cairngorm National Park. We want this to inform conservation policy and land management into the future. And we think it's an inspiring tool for people to gather around and to promote and target conservation action within the national park. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you especially for giving us some good news. You know, it's so nice to see graphs going in the right direction there with riverflies and watervole, not least because it's from my local national park and one that I really care a great deal about. So fantastic to have that. Thank you. We've got